Imagine looking back 10 years from now and realizing that all the time, energy and love you poured into someone was never going to change the fact that they weren't the one. What if I told you that in just 20 minutes you could stop that from ever happening? People often stay in the wrong relationships because they believe that the time they've invested justifies continuing even when they're unhappy, unfulfilled, or constantly compromising their own needs. There's a psychological phenomenon known as the sunk cost fallacy, the idea that the more time, energy, or emotion we've put into something, the harder it is to walk away, even if continuing causes us harm. In relationships, this shows up when someone thinks we've been together for 5 years, I can't throw that away, or I've already waited this long for them to change, maybe it'll happen soon. This mindset traps people in relationships that are emotionally draining or stagnant, simply because they don't want to feel like those years were wasted. But here's the truth: continuing to invest in something just because you've already invested a lot doesn't make it valuable, it makes it costly. Time alone doesn't equal growth, connection, or compatibility. Two people can be together for a decade and still lack emotional intimacy, mutual respect, or shared life goals. What makes a relationship valuable is not its length but its quality, how you're treated, how you grow together, how emotionally safe and seen you feel. Just because you have history doesn't mean you have a future. The years you've already spent aren't a good enough reason to spend more, especially if those years have been marked by inconsistency, emotional distance, or unmet needs. People often mistake longevity for success, as if staying longer somehow validates the relationship's worth, but staying in a relationship that constantly leaves you anxious, second-guessing yourself, or compromising your happiness is not loyalty, it's self-abandonment. The idea that we've been through too much to give up now is a dangerous one, especially when the too much is really just code for unresolved hurt patterns that keep repeating, or a hope that one day things will magically be different. Time spent in the wrong relationship doesn't build a stronger connection, it just deepens the roots of your emotional dependence, making it harder to leave even when you know deep down that you should. People justify it by saying they've invested too much, but real love isn't a stock market where you wait for the numbers to go up. If the relationship hasn't grown in the right direction after years, it's unlikely that more time will suddenly transform it into something healthy or fulfilling. In fact, every day spent in the wrong relationship is a day you're not available for the right one, not just romantically but emotionally and mentally. Time is a currency you can never earn back, and while you can't change the past, you are fully in control of what you allow moving forward. Recognizing that time invested does not equal value gained is one of the hardest but most freeing truths you can accept in love. It gives you permission to stop justifying pain, to stop clinging to potential, and to finally choose what actually serves your future instead of honoring a past that no longer does. Most people believe it takes months or even years to truly understand who someone is, but the reality is that people reveal their character, intentions, and emotional availability very early on, often within the first few weeks, sometimes even the first few conversations. The problem is we're usually too distracted by attraction, chemistry, or the excitement of potential to pay attention to what's right in front of us. In the beginning, people show you how they communicate, how they deal with discomfort, how they handle boundaries, and how consistent or inconsistent they are. If someone struggles to show up consistently, if they're vague about their intentions, or if they deflect responsibility when something goes wrong, those are not just quirks, they're signs of emotional patterns that are likely to repeat over time. But because we're often more focused on how much we like someone rather than whether they're actually good for us, we rationalize these behaviors. We interpret inconsistency as mystery, emotional distance as independence, and red flags as challenges to overcome, rather than warnings to heed. The truth is, people don't suddenly change into someone incompatible after 2 years. They were that person all along. We just didn't want to admit it. We hoped that what felt off would correct itself, or that our patience and effort would bring them closer, open them up, or somehow transform the connection into what we imagined it could be. But emotional unavailability, Poor communication, defensiveness, and mismatched values aren't things that appear randomly one day. They are visible early, but we overlook them because we're afraid of losing something that feels promising. We silence our gut instincts, ignore that subtle discomfort, and convince ourselves to give more time, more chances, more benefit of the doubt, believing that clarity will come later. But clarity doesn't always arrive with time. Sometimes it arrives the moment we choose to pay attention. When someone dodges vulnerability, avoids direct answers about what they want, or makes us feel unsure where we stand, that's not a phase, it's a pattern. And while it's true that everyone has flaws and no one is perfect, there's a difference between imperfection and incompatibility. The latter shows up early and stays present. The way someone talks about their past relationships, how they speak to a server, how they respond when you say no, how they behave when you're upset. These are all windows into their values and emotional maturity. You don't need to wait until you've moved in together, met their family, or shared a major life decision to know if someone is right for you. You simply need to observe without distortion, listen without projecting, and trust your instincts instead of trying to rewrite the story in your head to match the one you want. The biggest red flag isn't in the other person's behavior, it's in your willingness to ignore what you already know. What you see early on is usually who they are, and hoping for change won't make that any less true. Emotion often clouds logic, especially in romantic relationships, where feelings of attraction, chemistry, and emotional longing can overpower clear thinking and override our instincts. When we're emotionally invested in someone, our brain starts filtering reality through the lens of hope, desire, and attachment, making it incredibly difficult to assess the relationship objectively. We excuse bad behavior, justify inconsistencies, and minimize our own needs because we're afraid that seeing the truth might mean losing the connection we so desperately want to keep. It's not that we don't see the red flags, it's that we talk ourselves out of what they mean. We tell ourselves they're just having a rough day, they didn't mean it like that, or that everyone has flaws, and while that might be true to an extent, the pattern of excuses becomes a coping mechanism for avoiding emotional discomfort. The stronger the emotional pull, the easier it becomes to confuse intensity with intimacy, passion with compatibility, and obsession with love. We can be so emotionally drawn to someone that we lose sight of what actually matters in a healthy relationship: consistency, safety, communication, and mutual respect. Our logic gets hijacked by the chemicals in our brain that are released when we're attracted to someone: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, all of which create a false sense of closeness, even when we're not being treated in a way that aligns with our values. Emotional attachment can also create a powerful fear of loss, which convinces us that walking away from a bad situation is somehow worse than staying in it. That fear makes us hold on tighter, become more accommodating, and even start questioning our own reality. We ask ourselves if we're overreacting, if we're too needy, or if we expect too much, when in fact our emotional needs are completely valid. We've just become used to denying them. The heart is persuasive, especially when it wants what it wants, but logic is what keeps us grounded. The challenge is, when emotion takes the wheel, logic becomes a quiet voice in the background, ignored, dismissed, or drowned out by the fear of being alone, the hope that things will get better, or the fantasy of who we believe the other person could become. We start editing our expectations, adjusting our standards, and reshaping our boundaries just to maintain emotional closeness, even if that closeness is shallow or inconsistent. Emotional bias keeps us locked in cycles of almosts, maybes, and second chances, preventing us from seeing the relationship for what it truly is, rather than what we want it to be. In this state, we're not choosing love, we're choosing emotional survival. That's why it's so important to create distance, even if only mentally, and ask ourselves the hard questions from a place of clarity, not craving. It's only when we step out of emotional chaos that we can see what logic has been trying to tell us all along, that the relationship we're holding on to for love might actually be the one keeping us from receiving it fully. When you continuously tolerate certain behaviors in a relationship, you're not just silently enduring them, you're actively teaching the other person what is and isn't acceptable in how they treat you. Every time you let a boundary be crossed without consequence, every time you dismiss your own needs to avoid conflict, and every time you accept inconsistency, neglect, or emotional immaturity, you're reinforcing the message that you'll stay regardless. People learn from repetition, and relationships are built on patterns. What you allow becomes the rhythm the other person adjusts to. It starts subtly. Maybe they cancel plans last minute, and you say it's fine. Maybe they dismiss something important to you, and you brush it off to keep the peace. But over time, those small moments accumulate into a dynamic where your feelings become negotiable, and their comfort becomes the priority. And the difficult part is, this conditioning doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens because you're trying to be understanding, flexible, and loving, hoping that if you're easy to be with, they'll rise to meet your effort. But relationships don't work that way. You can't love someone into respecting you. You can't keep shrinking your standards hoping they'll notice and correct their behavior. In fact, the more you tolerate, the less incentive they have to change, because the consequences for their actions don't exist. They've learned, through your silence or forgiveness, that they can continue behaving the same way and still keep access to your time, energy, and emotional investment. And this isn't always malicious or intentional. Often people simply operate within the boundaries they're given. If no boundary exists, or if it exists but is never enforced, then there's no real accountability. You may think you're avoiding conflict, but you're really building resentment, slowly eroding your sense of self-worth by continuously sending the message, both to them and to yourself, that your needs come second. And once this dynamic becomes the norm, it's incredibly hard to reverse. You start feeling like you have to work harder to be valued, when in reality, you just never established the value of your standards in the first place. The heartbreaking part is that many people in this position believe they're being patient, believing in the potential of the other person, or waiting for things to go back to how they were, not realizing that the version of the relationship they miss only existed because they hadn't yet revealed their true needs. Once your expectations surface, and you still receive less than what you need, the dynamic shifts, but by then you've already trained the other person to expect you to tolerate less than what you deserve. This cycle is painful, not because the person is inherently wrong for you, but because you've allowed the dynamic to be shaped around silence, tolerance, and self-sacrifice. What you tolerate, you teach, and unless you raise your standards and reinforce them through action, the lesson learned will always be that loving you doesn't require change. When it comes to relationships, many people treat their standards like a wish list, hoping that the person they want will eventually check all the boxes if given enough time, patience, or effort. They create an idealized version of what they want their partner to become, focusing on potential rather than reality, and assume that love can transform incompatibility into harmony. However, this approach often leads to disappointment and frustration, because standards are not meant to be aspirational goals for someone else to reach. They are non-negotiable filters designed to protect your emotional well-being and future happiness. Standards are the clear boundaries that define what behavior, values, and qualities you absolutely require in a partner to feel respected, safe, and connected. When you treat them as a mere wish list, you risk overlooking critical warning signs or settling for less than you deserve, hoping that time or love will bridge the gap. But compatibility cannot be manufactured or coached into existence. It is a fundamental alignment that either exists naturally or it doesn't. Expecting someone to grow into your standards places an unfair burden on the relationship and often results in a cycle of disappointment, resentment, and emotional exhaustion, because you are waiting for someone else's transformation rather than honoring your own needs. Moreover, this hopeful mindset can blind you to the fact that by tolerating behaviors or attitudes that don't meet your standards, you are lowering your self-worth and inviting instability into your life. When you allow flexibility where firmness is required, you send a message to yourself and to your partner that your core needs are negotiable, which ultimately weakens the foundation of the relationship. The truth is, standards exist not to limit love, but to ensure that love is healthy, nourishing, and sustainable. They are the criteria that help you quickly identify when someone is or isn't the right fit, so you can avoid wasting time and emotional energy on a mismatch. It's important to distinguish between standards and preferences. Standards deal with fundamental respect, communication, values, and emotional availability, while preferences are more about superficial likes or lifestyle choices. Confusing the two often leads people to discard critical standards under the guise of compromise, which in reality is just settling. Compromise is essential in relationships, but it can only happen after both partners have met each other's baseline needs and boundaries. When those baselines aren't respected from the start, you risk entering a relationship with built-in dysfunction. Recognizing your standards as a protective filter, rather than a wish list, empowers you to be selective, intentional, and clear about who you allow into your life. It encourages you to walk away early from connections that don't meet those non-negotiables, and prevents you from falling into the trap of hoping or waiting for someone to become what you need them to be. Ultimately, honoring your standards honors your self-respect and paves the way for a relationship where love is not just a dream, but a shared reality, rooted in genuine compatibility and mutual growth. In just 20 focused minutes, a powerful conversation can bring to light truths that years of hoping and wondering might never reveal, because clarity doesn't come from time alone, but from intentional honesty and the willingness to confront difficult questions head-on. When you create a space to pause and reflect, asking yourself or your partner the right questions about your needs, values, and feelings, you break through the fog of confusion and emotional noise that often clouds judgment in relationships, enabling you to see patterns, behaviors, and intentions with fresh eyes. This is not about rushing decisions or forcing conclusions, but about creating a moment of radical transparency, where pretenses fall away and genuine communication takes place. Often people avoid these conversations because they fear the answers. They worry that facing the reality might mean loss or change, but delaying this confrontation only prolongs uncertainty and emotional pain. 20 minutes of honest dialogue can reveal whether your values align, if your emotional needs are being met, and if both of you are willing and able to grow together in a healthy way, or if you're simply holding on to a relationship out of habit, fear, or convenience. It's during these conversations that you can pinpoint if there is mutual respect, willingness to communicate openly, and clarity about where the relationship is heading, which are crucial indicators of compatibility. Many times people continue investing in the wrong relationship because they avoid these hard talks, choosing to live in ambiguity rather than face uncomfortable truths. But ambiguity only extends the timeline of pain and confusion. The courage to ask direct questions like, "Are you truly committed to this relationship?" or "Do you see us growing in the same direction?" or "How do you handle conflict and vulnerability?" can be transformative. It provides not only answers but also a deeper understanding of whether there's a foundation strong enough to build on, or if the relationship is inherently misaligned. Moreover, this kind of clarity benefits both partners. It prevents wasted time and emotional energy for one or both people, and it fosters respect through honesty, even if the outcome means parting ways. The essence of saving yourself years of heartache lies not in waiting for time to fix what's broken, but in creating moments of intentional reflection and truth-telling early on, which illuminate whether the connection is worth continuing. It empowers you to make informed decisions based on reality, rather than hope or fear. Ultimately, a focused 20-minute conversation is a gift you give yourself, a chance to break free from the patterns of denial and wishful thinking, to stop investing in uncertainty, and to start building a future grounded in clarity, respect, and genuine compatibility. In the end, the most valuable thing you can give yourself is clarity. Clarity to see the truth about your relationship, to recognize your worth, and to make choices that honor both. Time spent with the wrong person is not a measure of love or commitment. It's often just time lost in confusion, compromise, and unfulfilled needs. But by pausing, reflecting, and asking the right questions, even if it's just for 20 minutes, you can save yourself years of heartache and regret. You have the power to stop tolerating less than you deserve, to trust your instincts, and to demand the respect and love that truly align with who you are. Remember, the right person won't require you to lower your standards, to guess their intentions, or to endlessly wait for change. They will show up consistently, clearly, and wholeheartedly. So don't settle for anything less than what truly makes you feel seen, safe, and valued. Your time, your heart, and your happiness are too precious to waste. Choose wisely, choose boldly, and watch how your life transforms when you do.